All right, I'm Chris Avina with American Outdoor News. Today, we have the co-author of The Barrens, which is a book coming out shortly based on a compilation of somewhat true life events, correct?
Yeah, so the book comes out May 3rd, and it is based in large part on a trip I took when I was 18 with three other women. Summer camp sent us out to the Phelan River in the far northern Canadian Arctic above the Hudson Bay. And we paddled about, 500 miles for about
Wow.
50 days. Yeah, and didn't see anyone else until like the last week when we ran into a group of fishermen. So it was just us in an area so far north that in the summer the sun doesn't set and trees do not grow. Yeah, it's a very incredible environment.
Now, that's a hell of a trip for three
Mm-hmm.
women to take. How
Yeah.
experienced were you on canoeing down these rivers?
Well, so I had been doing trips with this camp, Camp Widgewagon in northern Minnesota. It's a canoe-based camp primarily, but they also have backpacking. And I started at the age of, oh, I guess I was 12. I was going into eighth
Wow.
grade, if I remember correctly. And I started with a trip for a week in the Boundary Waters. And my family has property in northern Minnesota, right on the edge of the Boundary Waters. So I grew up canoeing. I really loved canoeing, but those were my first experiences really doing tripping in a more concerted, serious way. And then developmentally, the trips just kept getting longer in more challenging terrain in more remote areas with more technical elements. The first time I did whitewater, I was 16. And when I was 17, we started doing some more courses in it. Well, so when I was 16, I went on a trip to the Blood Vein River in northern Canada, and that has some, grade 3 whitewater. So I did get to experience like a lot of whitewater. That's I think where I learned the most, and that was also with just three other women, and that was a trip of around 30 days. And then when I went to the Arctic, I think that was the first time that I had really certainly been in an area so remote, that even a matter of getting an emergency evac can be difficult in terms of weather. At the camp we had an emergency evac. We couldn't get a helicopter out to get the group for 3 days because of weather conditions. So yeah, it was definitely a different experience and really surprising to be in just such a different space where it's like you look up at night and it's not even night, it looks like dusk, you can't see the stars.
Yeah. Now, at 500 miles through the Arctic is very remote. What
Mm-hmm.
kind of survival skills do you need to prepare for this because of all the perils that you can inadvertently stumble across? There's bears, there's wolves, there's
Yeah,
rough terrain, there's injuries, as we read in the book. How do you prepare for that?
I'd say realistically going into an area like that, the biggest threats that you are going to face are going to be, um, let's say, water first,
Mhm.
weather second, and then everything else comes third, including even like food resources at times. Um, but yeah, you really have to just prepare to treat the water with respect,
Yep.
treat particularly the rapids with respect, make sure that you are scouting and know what you're about to do. That's a big matter of safety. And also, I think you travel really differently in sizes of groups. Like when it comes to weather, because we were a smaller group, we were able to push through different weather events. Mostly wind is a really um, powerful enemy in an area with no trees. That's
Mhm.
covered in the book, especially when you get to the lake portions of the river. The wind sweeping across the Barrens creates, I was looking at about 2 meter high swells on a lake, and I'm in a
Wow.
canoe doing a 4 mile crossing. And at one point I'm looking, I'm like, ooh, I'm a mile off that shore. I'm a mile to the next island. Let's keep going.
You really got to be in good shape.
Yeah, well, it demands you be in good shape. It just happens.
Well, let's talk about the terrain, because
Yeah.
you know, you're never gonna be stronger than Mother Nature. What type of terrain did you encounter?
Portaging was really it was a challenge when you had to do it. You're on a river, so it's not that often. But when there's, you know, the canyon, obviously, and there's like a bunch of bigger sets that you just can't go down. So when you have to portage, you have to sometimes do these like whole mile, like 2 mile. Our longest was a 6 mile crossing, like through what's essentially like scrub brush and moss.
So you're getting cut up.
No, not cut up. It's just soft. It's really challenging to have to hike across soft terrain. It's kind of marshy and wet, and there's permafrost underneath it. So your feet are cold the whole time, even in the summer, just because like if it's wet, then it's, you know, touching that permafrost underneath. So just because it was soft, it was really challenging to have to hike.
Oh, plus you're carrying the canoe and your gear, your food.
Yeah, and the canoes.
Everything.
The canoes, we had PVC canoes. So they were just like plastic to really hold up against a lot of difficult things they had to do. But they're also kites in the wind, and you're carrying them as a solo person. And you have to be cautious about that. We usually had a spotter on the bow and stern just to make sure that you didn't catch and go swinging, and the canoe could go like a half-mile away before you even know it.
You could even hit somebody or...
Oh, easily. The wind in that canoe can be very, very terrifying. Then the packs were around 120 pounds for a food pack, down to 60 for a personal pack.
That's a considerable amount of weight to be lugging around.
Yeah, and you never just get to do it once. There's 4 of you, 2 canoes, and all your gear. It's not just one hike, it's back and forth. But that's the most fun part of portaging, is coming back with no equipment. You just get to take a relaxing stroll and look around.
All your food is gone, and
yeah. Yeah, you hope it's still on the other side untouched when you get there.
So what about, I mean, have you, it's very easy to lose your gear.
Yeah.
Hitting rapids and you know, anyone who's been rafting or canoeing knows that, I mean, you could flip and lose everything in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and that does happen. I know a few groups who it happened to. We were fortunate enough to not have any, we didn't have any dumps where we had loaded boats. We had one where we were running a set just to fall for fun. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do know a group who had a dump and lost half their equipment, and they were the ones who couldn't get an evac for about 3 days, and they were stranded without a tent. Wow. After having just gone into the Arctic River, and it was a very scary situation. And losing your gear is probably the worst thing that I could think of happening to me. You don't want to lose food in particular, but you really don't want to lose your tent. You don't want to lose your sleeping bag. I lost my fishing pole, but that was because I was cleaning a fish and I forgot to grab my tackle box and rod. And so that's somewhere in the Arctic. Someone I hope found it and has ended up with a nice fishing rod.
Yeah, you know, losing your gear could be a matter of life and death when you're in remote areas like that.
Yeah, particularly for backpacking groups, because when you're canoeing, there's a mentality that if you can portage it, you can carry it.
Yep.
So we front load a lot of our food and we don't have a drop. But if you're backpacking, I know the backpacking groups that, you know, if they didn't get one of their food drops because a float plane couldn't get in, or even a logistical issue happened, then, you know, they were in serious trouble. And I know people who lost, you know, 20 pounds in a week because of mild starvation.
Sure. Now, I know the terrain had changed over a 500-mile trek, and going through the canyons, I mean, you're literally surrounded by walls. As you
Yeah, that was scary. There's a lot of different terrain that happens along the Phalon. You have like the sandbars and sand eskers, which are probably the most fun. You even have an area called the Oasis, which I mentioned in the book, which is like pretty much the only standing grove of trees and forested area along the river. The Hornby cabins in that as well. But the canyon itself, I think that there's I mean, you don't want to go down the canyon because you can't get back out. That's the real terror of it, is that if you get swept down, and I remember as we approached it, it was so inconspicuous, and it's just marked as a rapid set on the map, as with any other rapid set. So ones we would run, ones that, you know, we would even see the end of and be like, oh, this isn't a rapid set. This is a little run. Let's do it. But we knew it was a set, so we wanted to pull off and check it out. And it was a giant, this wasn't even the canyon portion, this was just a waterfall that was like a 30-foot waterfall into a swirling hole at the bottom that I'm not sure anyone or any boat would ever come back out of.
Wow.
I remember someone had said, like, oh, we could go further and see if we can run it.
Lucky you didn't.
Yeah, get out of your boats and scout, even if you think that the run-up does not look very challenging. I remember it looked really still. It kind of had this still swirling eddy feeling about the whole top of it. And then when you get to the canyon, that's almost, you see it coming and you know to get out of the way, because it's just walls and it's rushing rocks and walls, and you can't scout a line, so it's just an impossibility and it's dangerous. But then the run out, when you get on the run out, we maybe hopped in a little too soon, because we ended up getting forced through a set that we couldn't scout, that we took on a lot of water and had to pull off immediately, but we didn't dump. But there's walls on either side, and you see like about a meter standing wave coming at you. And it's like, we have to do this to the best of our ability because we have no other option. And that's not where you want to be, particularly when it comes to whitewater.
So how often on this particular trip have you hit the point of no return?
On this particular trip, as I said before, as a smaller group, you're maybe prone to take more risks based on the strength of your group, having only 2 boats, and a myriad of other reasons. So we had a couple of sets that we ran that we did purely because we felt confident in our communication, the strength of our paddling, our whitewater skills. Mm-hmm. That, you know, were admittedly dangerous lines that if we had, you know, missed our line, we would have been at serious risk of injury or death. Uh-huh. And then the crossing too, that was, I think, one of the more terrifying things that we did. It felt like crossing an ocean, really. But we had been stranded on an island on Aberdeen Lake for about 3 days at that point. Mm-hmm. And we weren't going to make our pick if we didn't move. So it was a choice we made. And we were the only group who completed our route that session because of the wind. Yeah.
That's a life challenge.
Yeah. And I look back and I'm like, I don't know, I'm glad I did it. But at the same time, yeah, when I say like there was a moment where I'm like, okay, I'm a mile from each shore and I'm just with these waves, I wouldn't make it if we went in. So you just have to keep moving. I think that requires a lot of trust in the person next to you and a knowledge that you just have to keep paddling and moving forward, which, comes up in the book, I guess, having to paddle your dead partner out of such a remote and terrifying environment. I think a lot of what we try to embody is this idea of like, you just have to keep pushing forward. I guess in camping, it's like if you're on the middle of a trail, no one's going to come get you. Nope. There's not like, you can't cut out early. You can't fall back down. You just have to keep moving and find either the other side of the trail or the other side of that entire journey you decided to undertake.
Yeah, well, we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to acknowledge some of our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to get into the story of the book itself, which is really gripping. So we're going to acknowledge our sponsors, Underwood Ammo. One of, the only ammo I use. It's always a standard of excellence. Pyro Putty and Phone Scope, always innovative products. You should always keep Pyro Putty in your backpack because it'll always get your fire started. You'll never have to worry about it. And of course, Hunt of a Lifetime, we're going to hear from them right now. We'll be right back.
We love our children. We protect them. We guide them. We prepare them for life in the world. With all that we do, from deep in our hearts, we cannot control all things. Life-threatening illnesses and disabilities affect far too many of our children each year. While we cannot change the circumstance, we can make dreams come true. Dreams to provide hope, to provide spiritual healing and strength, to provide moments of happiness and relief in the hardest of times. We can give a glimmer of light and hope in a time of darkness and despair. Join huntofalifetime.org to help make dreams come true, to provide hope for children with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Hunt of a Lifetime is a non-profit organization fulfilling dreams for hunting and fishing trips to youth 21 and under with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Visit huntofalifetime.org to learn how you can make a difference.
Okay, and we're back. We're here with Ellie Johnson, co-author of The Barrens. And Ellie, you co-wrote this book with your father.
Yes. Yeah.
I know it's always challenging co-writing a book with somebody. How was it co-writing with your father?
Well, so the story of how this kind of came to be was, he had always been my camping buddy in a lot of ways. When I came off trail, I always regaled him with the stories, and he was probably the only one who was genuinely interested in the nitty and gritty of what I had to say. And when I went to college, I was in Burlington, Vermont, at the University of Vermont, and I was doing some writing courses. I'm an English major. And my dad says, oh, you should really write a short story about, two girls who go paddling on the Ceylon. Like, what if one of them gets hurt or dies and the other one has to get her out? And I was like, I'm busy. You can do that. And so he goes on to write a short story that was compelling and intimate. And I really liked it. And we decided to collaborate further, him from more of a fiction standpoint. I'll say at the end of the day, he's the writer and I'm the story. But there was, I guess, just hours and hours and hours of conversations, beers, pool, talking about, not only the Ceylon itself, what a unique environment it is and how to convey that in a story, but also, my life story and a lot of my youth, to produce what, ultimately is not just a story about camping, but a story about, humans and how the stories in our lives create us.
Well, there's certainly a lot of adventure there, and some of it has to be taken from your own knowledge, your own experience, your own sense of life.
Yeah, grizzlies. I had a grizzly encounter when I was on the Ceylon, but not nearly as interesting. I tell people that we were just paddling along the shore and we turned a corner and I was like, oh, that's a weird looking boulder. And then the boulder turned and looked at us. So we had to cross the shoreline and it followed us for a tiny bit, but then wandered back inland. And grizzlies are just massive and terrifying.
They look at you with bad intentions.
The locals, when we flew in, it was funny because one of my friends had brought a ukulele on trail and was a musician, or I guess it was a pat guitar, not a ukulele. But one of the people who flew us in asked if it was a gun, and we were a summer camp. We weren't allowed to have guns.
Sure.
And we said, oh, no, it's a guitar. And they were like, oh, what do you have for the bears then? And we said, oh, we have bear spray. And they said, oh, you know what we call that? We call that seasoning. I was like, oh, that's not good.
Yeah, they're terrifying animals. And, you know, I know of, actually, I interviewed one person in particular that was attacked by a grizzly. And he was fortunate enough not only to survive the first attack, it was the second attack. He survived both attacks. And, you know,
The Revenant.
Serious. It could have turned out ugly. Well, not that it wasn't ugly to begin with. Could have been a hell of a lot worse.
I'm surprised he survived. When bears get focused like that, that's when it's really scary. Either when they like claim, those are the bear encounters I've heard of that have been really scary, when bears will claim environments.
Oh yeah.
And kind of force other people out. That happened to a group who was on trail. They essentially got forced out of their campsite with only a first aid kit. And had to just keep far enough away from a grizzly bear for the next like day before someone could come get them. Yeah, and that was unpleasant. When we have to do bear training, and you know what they tell you in the bear attack, you are trying to keep your internal organs facing the ground, and you don't want to let them roll you. So you're supposed to like put your hands behind your head, like lock them, like you're up against the wall and the cops have a gun to your head, and you put your legs out to the side. So if a bear tries to flip you, it can't.
Yep.
Yeah, and you cover the back of your neck. I remember that's what they told us to do. And I've never forgotten it because it seemed like something that like you don't want to know, but I did feel like it would just be something that I'll always need to know, especially like traveling in the Rockies and even skiing. And, you know, it's just
survival training.
Yeah, and grizzlies are everywhere in northern US and Canada.
Well, you know, they had them on the endangered list for a while, and I don't think they're endangered anymore. You know, it's
well, it's, you know, it's specific species and specific like groups are endangered. You know, it's like I know the ones that are fishing up in northern Canada along the ocean, they've been receding inland, but I don't think like grizzly bears as a species are being threatened, at least not right now. They seem to be doing just fine.
They're flourishing. So the two main characters from the beginning of the book that I've gotten up to was Lee and Holly, two young college women who took this endeavor down 500 miles of river. And one of them gets really badly hurt right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Now, is that based on real life, or is that, you know, a little bit Hollywood license?
It's a little bit Hollywood licensing, just because that ends up like being the core of the story is just, you know, paddling someone out who's injured. I guess what ends up being the main difference here, and anyone who's really gone to these remote areas could consider like the worst case scenario is that you lose your means to call for help.
Yeah.
And that's why everyone says have three, have two, have three, don't have one. Don't just have a beacon. Don't just have a sat phone. You have two things or three things and you keep them separate. We had a beacon and a sat phone and kept them in two different boats. So it was really unlikely to swamp both boats. And if we swamped both boats, then we were already screwed.
You're really up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah. So we start with the basic premise of like, oh my God, how scary would it be if you only had one thing and you lost it? Because your only option then is to just keep going and just keep paddling out. Yeah.
Well, to me, it's a very strong story. The writing is really amazing. And like I said, you know, just setting the tone of the story, it's not only are you trying to survive and get out, you're trying to, the character is bringing an injured friend strapped into a canoe or trying to get you out of there is that's an undertaking in itself. And, if you watch Burt Reynolds in Deliverance, you see
Yeah.
right there the issues of trying to get somebody out of a river.
Well, so there was a group at camp, and I'm really close friends with a few of the people who are on this trip. They were paddling the same river, a lower portion that Holly and Lee don't even get to in the book, but they had a bad dump. One of the boats went down, and they ran out of the set. They lost half their equipment, and one of the girls was essentially found like almost a half-mile downriver, washed up and hypothermic.
Wow.
And they had lost their tent, and were stranded. And it took them, I think, the afternoon on the third day is when they finally got an evac, and they had spent pretty much that entire time using the sleeping bags they had left that were dry and the clothes that they had to keep that girl alive and warm. And she perked up after the first day, but it was still absolutely terrifying and traumatizing to everyone involved. And yeah, I think that in a lot of ways inspired that story too, just like talking to people about just like the very true terror of just feeling so alone with the situation you have in front of you. You don't call 911, you don't call an ambulance, and you try to call that one person who can just come get you and tell them what's happening.
Yeah.
The first people we call is camp, because they organize our resources, they have our insurance, and they have rescue resources on standby. But at the end of the day, it's just you out there, trying to rely on the medical knowledge you have from Woofer to keep, an 18-year-old girl alive.
Well, I haven't made it through the whole book yet, but I'll tell you from what I have read so far, I really can't wait to get through the rest of it.
Well, please enjoy yourself.
I really, it's not often that I make the time to sit down and write a book. Managing a magazine, I'm reading constantly. So
yeah.
In my downtime, the last thing I want to do is pick something else up to read. But I tell you, right from the get-go, it really grabbed me.
Well, at its core, it's an adventure story. It's meant to, I guess, not be sat down and read over weeks and weeks and weeks, but something that you just let grip you and, work through the adventure with Holly and Lee.
Well, I think they're great characters. They're strong characters.
Well, great. Thank you.
And, it's something that all of, our listeners should definitely step out and when it comes onto the market.
Yeah, I highly recommend May 3rd.
May 3rd. It's right around the corner. It's a few weeks away.
Yes, it is.
Where are they going to be able to find it?
So we're publishing through Arcade Publishing. It's distributed by Simon & Schuster. You can literally just Google the Barrens and the Barrens book, and it will pop up nice and quick for you for purchase on Amazon, through Barnes & Noble online, any online retailer. And we are going to be at Magazine Quinn in the Twin Cities as well.
Do you have a website or social media that people could follow you on?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at LEJ418, and my father is on at Kurt Johnson Books on Instagram. No website as of right now, just the Arcade Publishing website, or the Barrens book for Arcade.
I think it's a great story. I'm really glad that your publicist reached out to me. And
well, thanks. I really appreciate it.
So what else is in the works? So do you have other books planned or other adventures that you're going to be basing future stories on?
Well, yeah, right now I'm trying to work through some stories, still focusing on the camp aspect. What I'm looking at right now is moving towards the East Coast side of the camping history. But my father has a book that he's working to get published right now called Las Vegas Turnaround, which is based on his time working as a nightclub manager in Las Vegas. He did that for about a little under 10 years, I think. And
that's pretty exciting.
Oh, it was the 80s. Boy, does he have some stories.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good book. And I really hope it sees market.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I definitely appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you for having me.
And well, like I said, May 3rd, the Barrens, check it out. You're not going to be disappointed.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks again.